Good afternoon and welcome to the Tybee Island Corridor Charette. Today is day 3 and our final presentation. We've had a very productive 3 days. We want to thank you for your participation. It's been wonderful. This is going to be a continuing process. We're going to continue working with the city and with its residents. I want to thank Professor Hollick, our design team, and also the city officials and all the participants who came to Tybee Island, beautiful Tybee Island, for this charrette. And I want to introduce Duncan Ross, who's going to give you our final presentation, and I think we're going to have Q&A.
Yes.
Following the presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome. My name's Duncan Ross with Professor Hollick. I'm a planner. I just want to introduce you to my colleagues who are here for the week as well. Tim McMillan, who's a landscape architect, and Sarah up the back there, who may have checked you in. She's a landscape architect as well. I'm a planner, community planner. We also had, some of you have seen Sean Bliss around. Sean Bliss is a principal with Professor Hollick, and he's a landscape architect as well. So we had planning and design professionals here to help facilitate this charrette. How many people, is your first time seeing any of this information this week? Just a raise of hands. Okay, so is today your first day? Raise hands, just want to get an idea. Okay, thank you so much for coming. We had an event last evening, and we've had some work sessions, breakout sessions with stakeholders in the corridor on Tuesday and Wednesday. And what we want to do today is just report back. This is a report back to you all about the findings that we've had and some potential solutions that we hope the city considers as they move forward. Slightly revised presentation to kind of cut down on all the background information, because some of you are experts at that now. Obviously, this is who we are. Professor Hollick is working for the Coastal Regional Commission, provide the technical assistance for the charrette, so that's our role here, but we are working for the Coastal Regional Commission, who are out of Brunswick, if you didn't know that. How we got here. Some of you have seen this slide before, but I think it's an important one because it really sets up the premise for why we're here today. We're here to help the city kind of look at some things in the corridor. I'll explain what the corridor and the study area is in a few moments. In 2008, the city adopted their master plan. Their master plan kind of revisioned the city of Tybee Island, and it identified a number of kind of aspirational theme areas which would guide future planning efforts. So we're here to kind of revisit some of those items and to help implement that vision that was created back in 2008. We're here to kind of look at, hear comments, offer solutions to make sure the city has the right rules, kind of the right regulations for the right places, so we can prosper and minimize issues, some of the issues that we've heard over the last few days. Be prepared for the next growth. And I want to use the word growth in a different kind of context here, because I think that's kind of important to kind of better clarify what I think growth means for Tybee Island. I think growth, in my opinion, is really how do we accommodate developing those infill lots we have? How do we accommodate redevelopment? How do we accommodate what we already have? And I consider that growth, not expanding areas to accommodate growth that shouldn't be in those areas. So that's how I use the word growth in this presentation. So I just wanted to clarify that one issue. Accommodate future land use regulations or land development requirements. There are things coming that are outside of your control as a community, things like stormwater requirements that you'll have to start addressing in the future, and we hope to be able to bridge that and help with some solutions on how folks can redevelop yet maximize the developability of their land. Improve investment conditions within the corridor, I think is something that is very important for that whole infill, vacant development and redevelopment aspect that we need to consider. And most importantly and overall, our goal was to ensure that we heard items that maintain the quality of life for the residents and for the visitors that you get. Keep in mind your population is somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000, your permanent population, but you do have, because Tybee is a beach destination and it's a high visitor attraction in the summer months, you have a lot of people coming here and enjoying the great place that Tybee is. So that's kind of an overall statement about why we're here. We've done this charrette. The charrette is an intensive process where we hear, take comments, offer solutions, get consensus. We show you the information over here. This is just the work that we've collected from you all. This isn't our work. This is the information that we've heard from you all. And we use this information to develop some possible solutions. And we do that, and you guys see us doing it, and you refine it to make it better. You change it so it better reflects your ideas and issues. What I want to say is a charrette isn't a process about consultants coming to town and telling you what your needs are. It's a process where we receive information, together we identify the issues, and together we develop solutions. So that's kind of where we're here, why we're here, and what a charrette is. This is the schedule of events that we've had. We're at the conclusion of the charrette event. The ultimate conclusion of our services will be a report to the city that really documents the process, the last 3 days, and the findings and some solutions. In the back, Sarah, the comment forms. If we do have comment forms, we received a number of comment forms last night. We're asking to do the same today because we have one more approach or one more finding that we want to share with you all. So we've got comments from last night's events, but it's timely and certainly worthwhile for you all. If there's something new you want to add, we'd ask you to fill out a comment form again, just to see if anything's changed between last evening's comments and today's. Some of you have taken comments, taken the forms back, and you may want to drop them off today or mail it to them. The information is on the comment form to getting that back to me, and I will make sure it's compiled and it's put in the report that we submit to the city. Comments are due just postmarked or emailed by April 6th, and that's on the bottom of the form, and there's numerous ways of getting me that information. Participants, that's who you all are. Primary stakers, on Tuesday we had 26 folks come in. We did our work session with those people. We generally came up with these findings, discussion. If you can see at the top of that page, it says primary stakeholder findings. That's generally the information and discussion that we had with those groups on Tuesday. Wednesday morning we had about 18 folks come in. We had another work session. We looked over the previous day's work, and we did some new kind of question and answer type discussion sessions, and the things that are secondary stakeholder ideas and suggestions are over here. So we've kind of got our feedback, our secondary stakeholder ideas and suggestions, and our third set is those comment forms, and it's all important information. It'll all be documented, and it'll all go in our final report. It will take me a while to type out all those comments that I got yesterday, but they'll be typed out exactly as they are written, as I can decipher them. Except anything that is not germane to the question. I did read one comment, and yes, I am graying a little bit, and I don't use any hair products, so thank you. Charette goals. These are some of the goals that we had kind of going into it. A lot of these items here, in fact, are part of your master plan today for the Arts, Eats and Eco-Business Corridor, which is the master plan corridor that is overlaid over this area that we've been studying for the last 2 days. So kind of these are the goals, these are the types of things that we've challenged people to think about and to respond to. And again, this is really kind of in keeping with the master plan that was already developed. We're furthering, taking that master plan a little bit further so we can implement it. Okay, where is the corridor? For those who are new, and there's some of you in the room, we're talking about an area that is adjacent to Highway 80 as you come into Tybee. It's essentially the gateway into Tybee Island. It's about 1.4 miles long, it's about 80 acres, and it really covers the boundary of the C2 zoning district. So that's the study, that's been the focus of our design charrette the last few days. The character area, as I mentioned, is that Arts, Eats and Eco-Business corridor that's identified in your master plan document, and that document gives us the backdrop of how to look at implementation activities to move that vision forward. And I think that we've done a good job, both the participants and the charrette team, on being consistent with that vision in the master plan. The study area, a close-up picture obviously, just showing what's there today. It's probably a little bit far out for you all to decipher some things, but obviously it's parts of it is parts of the corridor commercial, parts of the corridor residential, parts of the corridor marsh views, marshland. It's got a real mix of geography and different spatial kind of relationships within the corridor. Existing conditions real quick. Citywide, this isn't just in the corridor, this is citywide. About 3% of the city is used as commercial uses, residential uses because of the nature of the island and what it offers and its destination as a beach attraction. Residential is, there's a lot of land consumed for residential purposes, and that makes complete sense. The study area land use reflects that, kind of the citywide. It's about 12 acres of commercial out of that 80 acres, and about 27 acres of residential land use. And that's generally how the land is used today. The zoning districts, a little bit different kind of outcome on what that tells us. Zoning obviously is how you can use your land, not how the land is currently used. The city has about 9% of its corporate limits zoned as commercial, but only about 3% of land is utilised. So that's kind of the difference there. And similarly with residential zoning districts, about 60% of Tybee is residential in nature, and that also makes sense. So there's room for both residential and commercial to expand and grow into those lands already designated for those uses. The study area zoning, as I mentioned, and some of you know this too well, it's the C2 highway commercial zoning district. It also has a unique situation where there's an overlay, there's a TBR overlay district on the same area as the C2. I just wait a minute because I'm being mic'd up here. Okay, preliminary findings. This is some of the new stuff. If you remember last night, it was kind of an open house that turned into a presentation, which was great because we were able to get some feedback, I think, and it worked well. So initially it was only meant to be just an open house, but some people wanted to hear some of this stuff and kind of see the process, so we were glad to oblige and do that. What I wanted to do now is just kind of go through some of our findings, and these are findings, not necessarily recommendations. The recommendations, we'll clean them up a little bit as we move forward, but ultimately our report will reflect several options on how the city can move forward. And I think options are good because it allows more people to review those and consider options and determine which ones are the best for the city and for that corridor. So that's how, preliminarily, that's how we're considering the final report. Approach one, now this is approach one, and generally it should have the same information on here and here, so you can look either place. We have three approaches. The general consensus of the participants over the last 2 days have been, we know it's a commercial corridor, and if we're living in the corridor, we're living in an area that's C2, we understand that. We don't want you all to change anything. So that was the overall consensus of the groups over the last few days. And I say consensus as in the majority of the people generally agreed, and that was our direction on how we moved forward in identifying some solutions. Not to say that there may be some people who disagree with that, but that was the consensus, so that's how we move forward with developing some ideas. Approach one really is, again, we have to look at both policy, the city's policy and the city's regulations to make sure that they mesh. So approach one, you would maintain the boundary of the arts, eats and eco-business character area as it is in your plan today. So that's the policy items taken care of. And then you have to look at the regulatory side of that. And in approach one, we thought that it was a valid approach to develop where we would essentially maintain the C2 because that was an overriding consensus item that we heard, and also to maintain the TBR zoning district. And the TBR zoning district is that district that allows single family and duplex units to go into the C2 zoned lands. So that was an option, and so we kind of communicated that, and we've identified it as approach one. Approach 1, 2, and 3 are not ranked, they're not prioritized. It's just, they're just numbered, just so we all can have a frame of reference so we know what we're talking about when we're discussing them. I think an overall thing, this is a slight change from yesterday because we didn't have it listed in the items below. There was a general consensus, regardless of the options and approaches within the C2 corridor and potentially other areas, other commercial areas in the city, we need to look at perhaps modifying our parking requirements. And that's not a C2 corridor necessarily issue, and it's germane to each approach. So we've added it to each approach. Now, it's not to say that we would reduce parking requirements without having other preconditions met. We're not here to, we don't think that's a good idea. In order to, if you wanted to look at and consider modifying parking to reduce that requirement in order for folks to develop on those vacant commercial lands, redevelop or convert a use from residential to commercial that are on C2 lands, we think that we need to reconsider or reevaluate our parking. But as a precondition to that happening, other things need to also be completed to make that work. You know, those unintended consequences of making a zoning change without thinking what would that lead to. So those preconditions, we think, and we've called it here a unified solution, we need to look at on-street parking, we need to look at providing some areas for off-street parking within the corridor that will alleviate and potentially allow you to reduce that parking ratio requirement, which is today 1 per 200 square feet for commercial uses, which is the same as what Walmart has to provide or any other typical commercial use. We think this is a unique enough area where you can potentially reduce that with preconditions met and still make it all work. So approach one is generally, those are the major elements. The other elements we heard, which is based upon the findings from the stakeholders, are some other issues that would go along with that approach. They include, and we've also identified the responsible implementing party to those items. So noise code enforcement, noise code regulations, hours of operation, which would generally would minimize conflicts with adjoining uses. You know, we certainly heard that as an item issue that needs to be looked at and considered moving forward. So approach one would also include a number of other development-specific requirements that would need to be considered as well. So the city would be responsible for that, and I'm not going to repeat these for each approach, but they are generally consistent on each of them. Speed, A lot of people felt that traffic speeds and traffic calming generally was necessary and needed. The city, the folks that we spoke to who were attending the meetings, generally acknowledge the city and GDOT needs to kind of revisit some of the speeds and traffic calming options that we have out there to make it safer for both pedestrians, bikers, and the travelling public as well. Access management is an issue moving forward. Access management is, again, vacant, redevelopment or converting uses. When they have to have a new driveway connection onto Highway 80, that triggers new code requirements to be met, which will significantly change and reduce some of their developable land. So we need to see if we can, on the city side, accommodate and minimize those impacts from these folks having to come bring things up to code. That's what we mean by access management. What we mean by setbacks is in the commercial area, we think we could revisit some of the setbacks. Again, commercial next to commercial, maybe there's a way where we don't have to have a 6-foot setback. Maybe there's better ways of addressing that. Streetscaping, we really heard a lot of people who were appreciative of the city's efforts down in the C1 down front section in downtown. They may not have appreciated it at the beginning, but people liked the landscape and the theme of that unified landscape down there. They'd like the city to do a similar effort along the C2 corridor because it is such a gateway entrance into the community. What that looks like, we'll certainly design up some ideas. It's not going to be like a downtown, down front condition, but it'll be appropriate for the corridor to make that. So we'll have some ideas and suggestions that we'll do when we go back to our office. Height limit. We talked about a height limit a little bit last evening, and we're not talking about allowing buildings going significantly higher than they are today. What we're really trying to address here in this height limit is allowing buildings, new buildings or converted buildings, allow them, currently the height limit is 35 feet. It really restricts their ability and maintain that height of 35 feet with a pitched roof, which is characteristic of Tybee and the corridor. If we were allowed to, if those folks who wanted to do a pitched roof, maintain the architectural character of the area, they were allowed to go a few feet higher, it would certainly, to say 37, 38 feet, I'm just throwing out numbers here, it would allow them to do that without dramatically reducing the interior heights of their structure, which may not be amenable to them and their program that they have. What we're doing by maintaining a 35-foot height is you're really creating a situation, because remember, you have other things happening here. You have FEMA flood zones, so structures need to be elevated anyway if they're new. You already have a lot of these other development regulations that are already limiting some of your potential here. So what we're thinking here is just for roofs that are pitched, allow them to go a little bit higher. We don't think it would be detrimental at all to the island or the corridor. So those folks can really have the same height as someone with a parapet, but just let them go a little bit higher to do that pitched roof. We think it's a visual thing, it's a character thing, and we think with the right language we can ensure that that obviously doesn't get out of hand. And buffers, we're going to develop further the city's buffer and its green space requirements on the commercial lands in the C2 corridor, just to see if there's anything we can do to better utilise those lands available for development. So that was kind of I wanted to spend a little bit more time on these development standards. They go along with each approach. They're the same. So you really can't have one without the other. It's a kind of a package. And it's important to keep them together as a package, however you all decide to implement them. The difference with approach number two is generally what we saw last evening, but we certainly have heard some things about modifying the boundary of the arts, eats and eco-business character area. And we think that should be looked at as well. We think that there are some areas within the corridor that could be modified to the adjoining character area description or created as a new character area, the ones that are more residential in nature. That's a concept that we have within this approach too, and that's what we mean by it. The C2 would remain the same. Obviously, that's a tenet that we've had from our participants. They've asked us not to modify that or change that because those folks who have been involved said, don't change our zoning. TBR would remain throughout. Actually, this is what happens when you copy and paste. The TBR in approach number 2, and let me correct it by the time we leave. The TBR, and I think this is a good, if you can get this up so I don't trip. The main difference with TBR with approach number 2, and I'll stand over here so I don't stand in the way. The participants thought that, give us some solutions for the areas that are more commercial in nature and that kind of contiguous commercial areas. So approach 2 was to reflect those comments. So in certain areas, the dark red areas would be areas where the C2 remains, but the TBR is removed. Now the TBR again is that zoning overlay district that allows single family and duplex units. So in certain areas, example, in this central area here, generally between Polk and Campbell, not all the way to Campbell, and if you want to know exactly where it is, come up after the presentation and I'll point it out. That area is generally residential, marsh. We think that maintaining the TBR there and removing it in the darker red areas is probably better reflective of what's on the ground and what would develop in the future. We made some changes as a result of discussing it with the groups in the last evening and yesterday. So these salmon coloured are those areas where residential is allowed, but so is commercial. And again, the dark areas are commercial today, mostly commercial today, contiguous commercial, and those are the areas that we don't want new single family or new duplex going in the future. We kind of want to have that area for commercial use. So that was approach number 2, and I apologize for the slide being a little misleading there or inaccurate. We'll correct that. I guess this is what we're talking about in terms of approach 2. As you can see, this middle section up here, these are our thoughts, and these are our thoughts for you to respond to and let us know. This middle section here where we would remove that TBR, or where we would maintain the TBR zoning district, we would change on the master plan these areas to the adjoining character area designations, for want of a better term. That would make both the regulatory side and the policy side consistent with one another. That's approach number 2. And again, this is just the same graphic as the one on the ground that I showed you. The colors are a little different only because it's represented differently on the projector, but the darker areas, and I guess this is a better contrast probably for you all to see, and you can see the legend on on the legend piece. The C2 with no TBR, which is kind of in this area here, is the geography of where that location would be, and the C2 with no TBR is kind of, this is the post office here, this is kind of the four corners of Campbell Avenue, and generally going on the south side all the way to Butler, with a little bit where there are, that area of commercial uses. So we want to maintain the commercial, the commercial feel and those areas commercial, not allow new single family, new duplexes going in there in the future. So that's the meaning, or that's the decision behind that concept. Approach 3, we actually came up with this. It was kind of floating around yesterday when we talked a lot about mixed use, more mixed use in the corridor. We looked at the comments last night, and we really felt like we had an opportunity to develop another approach. And this is really a modification of approach 1. And what it does, the only thing that really changes, well, there's 2 things that would need to change. We would probably need to revisit the arts, eats and eco-business character area on the policy side, because you've got to make sure the policy and the regulations are consistent. When they're not consistent, then you tend to have problems. What we also thought, and what we heard a lot was, don't take TBR away from us. And we said, okay, but how about this? How about if we modify the TBR, that if you wanted to do residential within the corridor, it has to be, the ground floor, or whatever we consider to be the ground floor, meaning, and for you all, that's different than Ireland, than places that don't have to have that FEMA requirement of being above ground. So the first floor would be commercial, and the above floors would be office or residential, and that would be the requirement. So what we would do here is still allow new residential to go into the corridor, but it has to be part of a mixed-use development. The building would have to have commercial on the ground floor, and it would be, you're allowed to do office or residential on the above floors. So again, 3 different options, slight variations of one, to make it more flexible, to give people the flexibility to do stuff in the future. I think what we want to hear today, so we can document it, is kind of some of your feelings and approaches for these 3 options. That's why we want to get your comments again, because now you've seen all 3, and we want to document so we can represent it to the city how you all feel about those different approaches, and further our work, kind of refine it as we go forward as well. Some of these development standards that we're looking at are also really important for those commercial lands that are in the district today. So we allow those vacant, underdeveloped lands to develop in the future when we start seeing the economy kind of come back from where it's been in the last few years. So this is some design scenarios that we've done, and this is just an example. We've chosen this area just so we can communicate ideas and thoughts. This is Laurel Avenue. This is generally across the street from us. This here is US 80. Obviously, we have to address GDOT access management. That's not something that we have a lot of influence over. That's the state. But what we thought here is, in order to minimize impacts on the adjoining residential uses, as part of developing our development standards, this would be the condition we're trying to get to in order to minimize impacts with adjoining uses, and also allow development to occur where it should occur. So this is, it's kind of a 2-dimensional graphic that starts to convey some ideas on how it would work. And what we're talking about is potentially, buildings still being up here, but in the future, if people, and keep in mind that we all know that there's existing homes here today, and there'll be homes there for a long time. This is not a condition that's going to happen tomorrow. This is a condition that will happen as the marketplace determines. But we see some opportunities where this area would maintain its commercial designation, and it can grow and expand within the area that it's allowed to. And we're trying to develop some ideas to make that happen, that aren't so restrictive that you all can't get the types of services and uses that we've heard that some folks would like to see in this corridor in the future, to make it more of a destination area. This is that same scenario. These are some existing conditions here. Photos. Please come up and have a look on the slide. We also have a board down here which does a little bit better job. These are examples that we found that we know about where we have residential. This is residential on one side of the street, and this is a commercial parking area that serves commercial on the front side of that. So we have some really good examples of where it works well, and we want to make sure that our regulations end up with these types of conditions, which we think are probably a good solution. It protects the residential, minimises their impact, but it also lets those commercial developments develop and provide that parking that they have to meet and provide for their customers. So please come up and have a look at that in a little bit more detail, as I know that it doesn't do justice up on the screen so well. Our end products, as I've mentioned several times, will come up with an articulated vision for the corridor, consensus built for those items that are generally a consensus item, and I've identified some of those regarding the zoning areas, you know, or not removing any zoning. We're not here to recommend zoning changes. We're here to hear from you and report back some of the options we have. And we'll do some further conceptual planning that identifies and further communicates those ideas. The comment form, if you don't have one, Sarah will hand them out. We're generally at the conclusion of our Charette presentation of where we are right at this moment. We want to thank you for participating, for the information that you've provided. We started off with some wondering why we're here, and I think a lot of people over the last day and a half, 2 days, have understood that we're here to kind of help facilitate and get some good information developed and back in the hands of the city so they can make some decisions on this. And we hope that we've done the jobs that we have been asked to do to gather that information and report back to the city your ideas. So with that, we have a question and answer time now. If you have any questions on the approaches, as I mentioned last night, be glad to take them now. If it's anything not related to the approaches, I'm sure other people don't want to hear them. I'll talk with you afterwards. So with that said, thank you, and our report will be submitted to the city in a month and a half, 2 months, perhaps earlier, but it'll be available, it'll be in print format and made available electronically. With that, thank you very much.